Somewhere in your house right now, there's probably a dragon. On a t-shirt, a movie poster, a cereal box, even somebody's tattoo. Which is strange, right? Because dragons never existed. Not once. Not anywhere. And yet, thousands of years before a single human being had ever even heard the word dinosaur, people scattered all over the planet agreed on the same impossible animal. Scales, claws, teeth, wings, treasure, bones. China drew it. Greece also drew it. Northern Europe, Mesoamerica, the Middle East, all of them, separately, with no contact, reached for the same monster. So the real question isn't why did humans invent dragons? The question is, what if they didn't invent them at all? By the end of this video, I want to show you why dragons might be the closest thing humans have ever come to a real scientific theory, long before science existed. Okay, to understand where this is going, you have to forget almost everything you know. No biology class, no natural history museum, no word for fossil, because that word won't be invented yet for a very, very long time. The entire concept of dinosaurs is still about 2,000 years in the future. Nobody has thought of it. Nobody can. You're a farmer. Bronze tools, maybe. And one ordinary afternoon, you're digging into a hillside, and your shovel hits something that isn't a rock. Half buried in the dirt is a skull the size of a wheelbarrow, teeth as long as your fingers, bones so heavy it takes 2 people to lift one. This thing, whatever it was, looked extremely qualified to ruin somebody's entire day. You call your family over, then your neighbors, then the village elder, the priest, the local equivalent of the smartest person you know. And not one of them, not a single human being on Earth, can tell you what you are holding. So you do the only thing a human brain knows how to do when it finds something it has no box for. You build a box. You make up a story. And the story has to be as big as the bones. For centuries, that's roughly where the explanation stopped. Humans are imaginative. Ancient people were superstitious. Dragons happened. Case closed. Until a historian at Stanford named Adrian Mayer noticed something nobody had really connected before. Wherever the dragon legends were strongest, so were the bones. Not in a metaphorical sense, geographically. The map of ancient monster myths and the map of major fossil deposits kept lining up. And once you see that overlap, it is genuinely hard to unsee. Let me show you what she found, because this is where it stops being a cute idea and starts getting a little bit uncomfortable. Start in China. For centuries, Chinese apothecaries sold these fossils as long gu, dragon bones, and long ya, dragon teeth. Then, right around 1900, a German physician named Haberer started buying them up by the crate, straight off pharmacy shelves, and shipping them back to Germany. In 1903, an anatomist named Schlosser sat down and actually studied the pile. And buried in that collection of dragon bones was a single ape-like molar. Schlosser looked at one tooth from a pharmacy drawer and concluded it belonged to a human ancestor, the first fossil evidence for ancient humans ever identified in mainland Asia. That one tooth sent scientists hunting. 2 decades later, at a place literally named Dragon Bone Hill, those expeditions uncovered Peking Man, one of the most important human ancestor discoveries in history. So an entire chapter of human evolution was sitting in a medicine cabinet, labeled dragon. Now jump west to Greece. The Greeks had the Griffin, eagle's head, lion's body, 4 legs, guards its nest on the ground. And they were weirdly specific about where griffins lived. Out east, in the deserts where Scythian miners dug for gold, roughly the Gobi region. Mayer pulled out a fossil map of that exact area. And in that exact region sits one of the densest beds of Protoceratops fossils on the planet, a 4-legged, beaked dinosaur, roughly wolf-sized, found to this day sitting on top of its nests full of eggs. Beaked, 4-legged, wolf-sized, nesting on the ground. I'll be honest, the first time I read this, I stopped and pulled up a photo of a protoceratops skull because I assumed the resemblance was being oversold. It isn't. I genuinely thought people were exaggerating until I looked at the skull myself. If a griffin is a myth, it's a myth that accidentally got the anatomy right. And this is the part where the pattern stops being a coincidence. Go to the Mediterranean islands, Sicily, Cyprus, Crete, the exact places where Greek stories placed one-eyed giants, the Cyclops. Those islands were once home to dwarf elephants, and a dwarf elephant skull has one enormous hole right in the center of the forehead, the nasal cavity where the trunk attached in life. But if you've never seen an elephant, if elephants don't live anywhere near you and never have, you are not looking at a nose hole. You are looking at a single gigantic eye socket, the size of a human torso. And an extinct island elephant is probably not your first guess. Finding a dinosaur skull without knowing dinosaurs exist is a bit like finding a crashed jet engine in a forest with no concept of flight. You can tell it's powerful. You can tell it's not from around here. But every answer your brain reaches for is going to be wrong in a fascinating direction. So step back and look directly at the board. China had dragon bones. Greece had griffins. The islands had giants. Different cultures, different languages, different gods. Same skull. Same mistake. And it goes further than the ancient Mediterranean. Mayer's later work follows the same trail into North America, indigenous traditions across the Great Plains, describing enormous thunder beasts and water monsters in regions that happen to sit on top of some of the richest fossil beds on the continent. Long before any museum expedition showed up, people knew the giant bones were there. They'd seen them eroding out of the Badlands for generations. They weren't wrong about the bones. They just told a different story over them. Which makes sense when you think about it. Every continent humans ever walked, sooner or later, they were going to trip over a skeleton too big to explain. A skull in a cave, a rib cage in a cliff, something enormous surfacing after a hard rain. And the human brain does the same thing every single time. It refuses to leave the blank empty. It writes something in. But not everyone thinks the bones are the whole story. And the alternative theory is, honestly, a little creepier. The anthropologist David E. Jones argued something different in a book called An Instinct for Dragons. His idea? The dragon is a stitched-together predator. Snake plus big cat plus bird of prey. The three things that have been eating primates for millions of years. He points to vervet monkeys, which have separate, specific alarm calls for snakes, leopards, and eagles. Three ancient fears, hardwired deep. Jones thinks the dragon is what you get when you fuse all three into one nightmare. And honestly, I don't think these two ideas compete. They fit together a little too well. Maybe evolution preloaded our brains to fear exactly this kind of creature, and then we kept digging up giant bones that seemed to prove the thing was real. Instinct built the fear. The fossils signed off on it. So back to the question we started with. Did humans really invent dragons? No, they didn't. They pulled them out of the ground, out of bones, bigger than any living animal. Bones in places nothing alive could explain. Bones that, if you held one without the words extinct, or evolution, or deep time, would all but scream at you that something massive and terrible used to rule this place, and might still be out there. And here's what I keep coming back to. We tend to file dragons under fantasy, the stuff of bedtime stories and tax-evading wizards. But that's not really what was happening. The dragon wasn't humanity's wildest fantasy. It was closer to humanity's first scientific theory. Ancient people found physical evidence. They asked a real question. What was this? They built a model to explain it. They got the details spectacularly wrong. No, it didn't breathe fire. No, it didn't hoard gold. No, it isn't sleeping under the mountain. But the core conclusion, something enormous lived here long before us, was surprisingly right. And thousands of years later, paleontology finally showed up with its brushes and its Latin names and its carbon dating, looked at what those farmers and miners had been staring at the whole time, and quietly admitted, yeah, you weren't completely wrong. So the next time you see a dragon, on a flag, a phone case, somebody's arm, you're not really looking at a fairy tale. You're looking at the first time our species found a bone it couldn't explain, and was brave enough to guess. And honestly, that's a pretty human thing to do.